General Marcus Thorne, a man whose spine was a monument to decades of service, sat in his quiet lakeside cabin, a world away from the sterile, hushed corridors of the Pentagon. His retirement had been a deliberate and profound retreat. The only combat he faced now was a stubborn fishing line and the relentless passage of time, a serene enemy. He'd meticulously constructed this life of solitude, trading the sharp, chaotic anxieties of command for the predictable comfort of creaking floorboards and the lapping of water against his dock. His hands, once quick and lethal, were now content to tie flies, their calluses a testament to a different kind of precision. He wore a simple flannel shirt, and his silver hair was a little too long, falling over the collar in a way that would have earned him a stern rebuke from a younger self. The peace of the late afternoon was shattered not by a sound, but by a tremor, a low, persistent vibration from the pocket of his worn denim jeans. He paused, his focus on a perfectly looped knot, and slowly reached for his phone. It wasn't his usual smartphone. This was a relic, a burner phone he'd purchased years ago and kept for one purpose and one purpose only. It was a digital ghost, a secure line no one was meant to ever use. He turned it over in his palm, the cheap plastic feeling both foreign and frighteningly familiar. The screen was a blank void until a single green pixel pulsed in the center. Thorne's weathered face, lined by years of stress and sun, tightened almost imperceptibly. His jaw, usually relaxed in retirement, became a hard, unforgiving line. He stared at the pulsing pixel for a full minute, his thumb hovering over the key. He could ignore it. He could toss it into the lake, let it sink to the bottom, and pretend this moment never happened. But the disciplined mind of a military man, once given a command, cannot simply stand down. With a grim, resigned exhale, he pressed the key. The phone came to life, not with a ringtone, but with a series of archaic, chattering tones as it connected to a private, encrypted satellite channel. The screen filled with a single, cryptic message from a contact he thought long retired. The name on the screen was simply a number. 7-9-Alpha. It was Colonel David Sterling's code name, an intelligence legend who disappeared from the grid a decade ago, leaving a quiet void in the Black Ops community. If Sterling was reaching out, it wasn't a casual hello. The text was short, but its meaning was a punch to the gut. Operation Chimera is active. It's coming from within. Thorne's eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, narrowed as he read the words again. The phrase was a code he hadn't heard in 30 years, a ghost from a top-secret counterinsurgency protocol. He remembered the briefings in a windowless room, the air thick with cigarette smoke and dread. Operation Chimera was never meant to be a real operation. It was a hypothetical, a bleak scenario they designed for a worst case in the history of worst cases, a systematic, orchestrated effort to dismantle the U.S. government from its core. The phrase, coming from within, was the final, devastating sentence of that protocol. It meant the enemy was not outside the walls, they were already inside, holding the keys. Thorne's eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, narrowed as he read the words again. The phrase was a code he hadn't heard in 30 years, a ghost from a top-secret counterinsurgency protocol. He remembered the briefings in a windowless room, the air thick with cigarette smoke and dread. Operation Chimera was never meant to be a real operation. It was a hypothetical, a bleak scenario they designed for a worst case in the history of worst cases, a systematic, orchestrated effort to dismantle the U.S. government from its core. The phrase, coming from within, was the final, devastating sentence of that protocol. It meant the enemy was not outside the walls, they were already inside, holding the keys. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over him, followed by the familiar, hot surge of purpose. His hands, which had been so steady just moments before, began to tremble with the force of his emotions. He felt a fire he thought had long since been extinguished, a dangerous, all-consuming fire that had once defined his entire existence. The weight of his old life, a crushing burden he'd laid down with so much relief, settled back onto his shoulders. The cabin, with its tranquil lakeside view, suddenly felt like a cage. He stood up, knocking his chair over with a loud clatter, his movements quick and decisive. He had to move. He had to find Sterling. Thorne grabbed a rugged duffel bag from his closet, the same one he'd carried in countless war zones. He began to pack, his mind a whirlwind of memories and fears. He could hear Sterling's voice in his head, a ghost from their last tense conversation. "We planned for everything, Thorne," the ghost said. "Nuclear strikes, bioweapons, a ground invasion. But the one thing we never truly trusted was the people we were supposed to be defending." Thorne's jaw clenched. The thought of a traitorous faction within the very heart of the country he had bled for, the very institutions he had sworn to protect, filled him with a cold fury. He wasn't just a retired general anymore. He was a sentinel, reactivated by a warning he prayed was a lie, but knew in his gut was the absolute truth. The fishing rod still lay on the dock, a silent testament to a life that no longer existed. He looked at the peaceful water and the setting sun, a profound sadness settling over him. He knew he was leaving this behind, perhaps forever. As he closed the heavy door of the cabin, the old phone in his hand chimed again. A second message, this one a single word: soon. Thorne's face was a mask of grim determination, a grim smile touching his lips as he looked out at the fading light. "Damn it, David," he whispered to the empty air, his voice raw with a newfound purpose. "You always did have terrible timing." Thorne drove into the sprawling concrete jungle of D.C., a man out of time. His old Dodge pickup, a vehicle built for back roads and quiet anonymity, felt out of place among the polished black sedans that glided along the city's asphalt arteries. The city hummed with a different kind of energy than the silent woods he'd left behind, a predatory, restless energy that clawed at the edges of his calm. He was an anachronism, a ghost walking among the living. He felt the weight of every passing car, every face in the crowd, as a potential threat. He met Sterling in a dimly lit, anonymous diner on the edge of the city. The place was a relic, with checkered floors, vinyl booths, and the scent of burnt coffee and fried onions clinging to the air. The clatter of plates and the murmur of quiet conversations were a stark contrast to the gravity of their meeting. Thorne slid into a booth, his back to the wall, surveying the room with eyes that missed nothing. He had chosen the spot for a reason. It was a place where no one ever looked too closely. Sterling was already there, hunched over a cup of black coffee, a nervous energy radiating from him like a furnace. He looked haggard, a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His face was a pale, drawn mask, his eyes wide and bloodshot, darting around the room with a frantic, animalistic fear. When Thorne sat down, Sterling's hands trembled so violently he had to put his cup down to keep from spilling it. The small action spoke volumes. This wasn't the stoic intelligence officer Thorne had known. This was a man on the very edge of sanity. "Marcus, I'm not crazy," Sterling said, his voice a strained, brittle whisper. He looked directly at Thorne for a fleeting second, his eyes pleading, before they returned to their frantic scan of the room. "I know what I saw. I've been monitoring the network. They've infiltrated everything. The NSA, the FBI, even a few key positions in the White House. They're a ghost in the machine. They don't have a face, a flag, or a uniform. They're everywhere and nowhere at once." Thorne listened, his expression unreadable, a stone statue in the flickering fluorescent light. He saw the panic and exhaustion etched onto Sterling's face, but also the unmistakable glint of truth in his eyes. He reached out, his hand firm and steady, and placed it on Sterling's. It was a gesture of solidarity, a silent anchor in a sea of panic. Sterling flinched at the touch, as if expecting an attack, before his shoulders slumped in a small, exhausted wave of relief. "Talk to me, David," Thorne said, his voice low and calm, a soothing counterpoint to Sterling's agitation. "What's their endgame?" Sterling's breath hitched. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss, his eyes locked on Thorne's now, the fear giving way to a desperate need to be heard. "They're staging a coup, a quiet one. They'll use a national crisis as a pretext to implement a new order. They'll claim it's for security, for stability. We're talking martial law, a total overhaul of the Constitution. They'll strip away our rights piece by piece, all under the banner of protecting us. They've already put the pieces in place." A sudden, sharp noise from outside, a delivery truck backfiring, a sound so mundane it was chilling, made Sterling jump violently. He knocked his coffee cup over, the hot liquid splashing across the table and his shirt. His hands were shaking violently as he scrambled to right the cup, a small, pathetic gesture of control. Thorne's expression remained calm, but his mind raced, a cold, clinical fire in his eyes. This wasn't just a plot, it was a plague, an infection that had silently spread through the very body politic of the country. Sterling wasn't a paranoid man. He was the first witness to a disease that was about to kill the host. The thought filled Thorne with a cold, clear resolve. They were out of time. The fight had already begun. Thorne knew he couldn't do this alone. The digital specter of the network was far beyond his physical capabilities, and the paranoid ramblings of Sterling, however true, were not enough to build a fighting force. His first and most difficult call was to Captain Lena Reyes, a former Black Ops specialist he had personally mentored. She was the best operator he had ever trained. A ghost, a wraith, a chameleon who could vanish in a crowded room and reappear behind a locked door. He had last seen her 5 years ago, standing on a podium to receive an award for an operation that would never be declassified. Now she was a loner, hardened and cynical, having traded the battlefield for a corner office, running a private security firm in the corporate world she once scorned. He found her in a sterile, modern office suite, a world of glass walls and sleek, minimalist furniture. The room felt cold and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the quiet chaos she once thrived in. Lena Reyes sat behind a large black desk, her posture ramrod straight, her expression a mask of professional disinterest. She wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit, a deliberate uniform designed to make her look like she belonged. Her dark eyes, which Thorne remembered as being full of a fierce, youthful fire, were now flat, meeting his with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "General," she said, her voice flat, the single word a polite but firm wall between them. "I'm retired from that life. I assume you know that." There was no warmth, no pleasantry in her tone. It was a simple statement of fact, a boundary she was not willing to cross. Thorne didn't sit down. He stood across from her, his hands clasped behind his back, a ghost of the man who had commanded battalions. His face, usually a map of calm resolve, showed a hint of the desperation he felt. He laid out the bare bones of the threat, keeping his voice low and steady. He recounted Sterling's warning about Chimera, the ghost network, and the plan for a quiet coup. He watched her face as he spoke, searching for a sign, any sign that she was listening. For a long moment, she said nothing. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, but a flicker of the old fire he remembered so well, a spark that she had clearly tried to extinguish. She watched her expression shift, the slight narrowing of her eyes as she processed the information, her mind already running through the scenarios and counter-scenarios. He saw an almost imperceptible twitch of her lip, a tell he had seen 1,000 times before. It was her brain catching up to her heart, the disciplined mind of a warrior recognizing the truth of the threat he was describing. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, the professional mask starting to crack. The cool veneer of her corporate life was melting away, revealing the battle-hardened tactician underneath. "You're talking about treason on a scale that makes Watergate look like a schoolyard prank," she said, her tone low, dangerous, and utterly serious. "Why me? Why not go to the authorities? The FBI, the CIA? Surely they would listen to you, General." Thorne's face softened, a rare display of vulnerability. He lowered his voice, almost to a whisper. "Because I don't know who to trust anymore, Lena. Sterling's message was clear. It's coming from within. I went to the one person I know would look at the facts and not the politics. The one person who would have the courage to tell me I'm wrong if they believed it. I trust you." His eyes held hers, and for the first time since he had walked in, the cold, distant professional in her office was gone, replaced by the fierce, loyal soldier he had always known. "And because you're the best there is." The silence that followed was long and agonizing, filled with the hum of the air conditioner and the silent screaming of her past life. Her gaze dropped from his, her eyes fixed on the perfectly polished surface of her desk. She was weighing the cost, a quiet, safe life of wealth and respect, against the messy, terrifying reality of a war with no rules, no allies, and no guarantee of survival. Thorne waited, his heart pounding in his chest, knowing he had pushed her to a precipice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she slowly lifted her head. The flicker of fire in her eyes was now a steady flame. Her jaw, which had been tight with tension, relaxed into a single, determined line. She reached out and placed her hand over his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. She gave a single, firm nod. The team was one soldier stronger. The war had officially begun. Their first lead took them to a seemingly abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of D.C. The address had come from Sterling, a single pin drop on a map, a digital breadcrumb that led them to the edge of the city's sprawl. The building was a hulking, rusted shell of a place, its windows boarded up and its brick facade crumbling. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and decay, a grim promise of what lay within. They approached in silence, moving like shadows, two veterans operating on instinct. Reyes, the ghost, was fluid and quiet, her footsteps making no sound. Thorne, the old warhorse, was more deliberate, his movements slower but no less precise. He was a man made of purpose and bone, and his hand rested on the grip of his pistol, a constant, heavy reassurance. They slipped inside through a broken loading bay door, the rusty hinges groaning a mournful protest. The interior was a vast, cavernous space, a tomb of forgotten industry. The only light came from the scattered beams of their flashlights, dancing over mounds of old equipment, broken pallets, and a thick carpet of dust. The place felt cold and vast, a silent void. As their eyes adjusted, they saw it in the distance, a single, bright light, a beacon in the darkness. As they moved closer, the soft electric hum of unseen machinery began to fill the air, a living presence in a dead place. They had found the hub, the heart of the ghost network. "They're not using any power from the grid," Reyes whispered, her voice a low breath. She pointed to a set of solar panels on the roof, visible through a large hole in the ceiling. Self-contained, they're trying to stay off the radar. Her face, illuminated by the beam of her light, was a picture of tense concentration. Thorne simply nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "Doesn't matter now, they're exposed." A grim smile touched his lips. They were finally on the offense. Suddenly, the silence was broken not by the hum of the servers, but by the crisp, unmistakable sound of a boot scuffing against concrete. Thorne's head snapped up. His eyes, already sharp, narrowed into focused points. A dozen armed men appeared from the shadows, their movements synchronized and efficient, emerging as one from the darkness. They were dressed in black tactical gear, their faces hidden by balaclavas. This was not a backwater militia, these were professionals. Their rifles were aimed, their stances perfect, their intent as clear as the light they had been hiding in. Thorne and Reyes were cornered, the space behind them a dead end. A silent agreement passed between them, a shared look of grim resolve. This was a war, and the first shot was about to be fired.
"Behind the crates, now!" Thorne roared, his voice a gravelly command that echoed in the vast space.
Reyes moved with lethal grace, a blur of motion and steel. She was a phantom, her body a weapon, her mind a finely tuned instrument of combat. Her suppressed pistol spat a series of quiet pops, and two of the men fell with no sound but a quiet thud. Thorne, older but no less dangerous, provided cover, his aim as steady as it was 30 years ago. He was a force of nature, a one-man army carving a path through the labyrinthine corridors. He watched the faces of their attackers, the eyes behind the balaclavas, noting the cold, emotionless stares. They were not driven by ideology, but by a chilling corporate efficiency. This wasn't a fight against patriots, it was a fight against hired killers. The air was filled with the deafening chatter of assault rifles and the splintering of wood as bullets shredded the crates they were using for cover. Thorne fired with a slow, deliberate cadence, his shots a calm punctuation mark in the chaos. He felt a searing pain in his arm as a bullet grazed him, but his expression never changed. He was in his element, the fire of battle reignited, his mind working 100 miles an hour, his body a well-oiled machine of combat. "I can get the flanking maneuver," Reyes yelled, her voice strained but sharp. She was a tornado of violence, moving from crate to crate, her body a blur of motion. She was a different kind of warrior than Thorne, all speed and cunning where he was strength and experience. "Negative," Thorne bellowed back, firing 2 shots that dropped an enemy soldier. "We're not winning this, we're escaping." It was a firefight, a desperate, close-quarters dance of death. They managed to escape, but the escape was a Pyrrhic victory. They were outmatched and outgunned. They burst out of a side door and scrambled into the darkness, the sounds of gunfire and angry shouts echoing behind them. They sprinted through a field of weeds and broken asphalt, the adrenaline pumping, the cold night air biting at their lungs. When they finally put enough distance between them, they collapsed behind a rusted-out bus, their chests heaving, their bodies drenched in sweat and cold with adrenaline. Reyes had a small trickle of blood on her cheek from a shrapnel cut, and Thorne's arm was throbbing. He ripped a piece of his shirt off and tied it around the wound, his face a mask of furious concentration. "They know we're on to them," Reyes breathed, her chest heaving. "They weren't just guarding a server, General. They were a kill team." She looked at him, her eyes wide with a new, sober understanding. The rules had changed. This just became a war. Thorne and Reyes, battered and bruised, met Sterling in a safe house, a small, nondescript apartment far from the urban chaos. The air was thick with the metallic scent of Thorne's blood and the lingering anxiety of their close call. Reyes, her usual mask of indifference gone, was carefully cleaning and bandaging Thorne's arm, her movements precise and gentle. The cut was deep, a red gash across his bicep that would leave a scar, a tangible reminder of their near-fatal mistake. "You're an old man, General," Reyes said, her voice soft but laced with a professional critique. "You should have stayed behind cover." Thorne just grunted, his face a grimace of pain. "No, that was my call. This is my war, Lena. We got too close, too fast." His eyes met hers, and he saw the fear she was trying to hide, the same fear he felt deep in his gut. This wasn't a game. They were a target now. Sterling, hunched over a laptop, was a nervous wreck, his fingers trembling as he typed. He'd been working relentlessly, using a hidden back channel he'd created years ago, a ghost in the ghost network. The apartment was a mess of empty coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches, a physical manifestation of his frantic search for the truth. He looked up at them, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a kind of horrified triumph. "I've got it," he whispered, the words barely audible. "The architect. I found him." Thorne and Reyes moved to the laptop, their bodies tense, their breaths held. On the screen, a picture appeared. A smiling face, a familiar face,
a face that had been on the cover of magazines and newspapers for a decade. It was Senator Vance, a popular figure and a champion of civil liberties, a man who had built his career on a platform of transparency, accountability, and protecting the very Constitution they were fighting to save. Thorne stared at the picture, his face a mask of contempt and utter disbelief. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his cheeks cold and pale. It was the perfect disguise. The kind of man he once would have trusted implicitly, the kind of man he would have voted for without a second thought. The betrayal was like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left him gasping for air. "It can't be," Reyes said, her voice a low, strangled whisper. Her eyes, which had been so fiery just moments ago, were now filled with a cold, unsettling dread. Vance? The man who championed the Citizens Privacy Act? The one who went after the NSA a decade ago for wiretapping?
Sterling nodded, his face a mask of pained confirmation. "He's been playing the long game, Marcus. He didn't fight the system, he played it. He built this network for years under the guise of an anti-corruption task force. He's been amassing power and influence, getting his people into key positions, all in plain sight. Every move was strategic, a step closer to this moment. He's a puppet master." Thorne growled, a low, gravelly rumble from the depths of his chest. His heart, which had been so full of purpose and resolve, was now a cold stone of betrayal. He felt a deep, personal sense of sadness for the country he had dedicated his life to protecting, the very institutions he had fought and bled for. The thought of this man, this wolf in sheep's clothing, using the very freedoms they cherished as a weapon against them, filled him with a cold fury unlike any he had ever known. "What's the end game, David?" Thorne asked, his voice shaking with a quiet rage. "What's his plan?" Sterling's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up a series of documents, financial records, encrypted communications, and logistical plans. "He's not trying to blow up the system, Marcus. He's trying to rebuild it in his own image. He's planning on using a national crisis as a pretext to declare a state of emergency and implement a new order. He'll seize control of all communication and infrastructure, all under the guise of protecting the nation. He's going to be a hero. He's going to be a new kind of dictator, a benevolent one in the eyes of the public." Reyes leaned against the wall, her face pale, a silent scream of disbelief in her eyes. "He's not a politician, he's a psychopath. He's turning patriotism into a weapon." Thorne's knuckles were white as he clenched his hands into fists. This wasn't an external threat, it was a cancer growing from the heart of the government. This was a war against their own kind, and the enemy was a face they trusted. He looked at Reyes, his expression hardened with a new resolve. "This is no longer a mission, Lena. This is personal. He's going to use the very things we fought for to take away our freedom. We can't let him win." To get to Vance, they needed an insider. Thorne turned to an old friend, a reclusive tech genius named Silas, a man who lived in the digital shadows. A man who, in Thorne's long and varied career, had always seemed one step ahead of a coming apocalypse. He was a brilliant but paranoid eccentric, a man who saw conspiracy in everything, from the patterns of streetlights to the metadata in a stock market crash. Thorne and Reyes found him in a bunker-like apartment, a fifth-floor walk-up in a forgotten part of the city. The door, a heavy slab of steel with multiple deadbolts, was a clear sign of his particular brand of madness. When Silas finally opened it, his eyes, magnified to an unnatural size by his thick glasses, widened as he saw Thorne. "General, they found you," he blurted out, a hint of genuine panic in his voice, his eyes darting to the empty hallway behind them. "I warned you about the ghost network. No one listened."
The apartment was a labyrinth of wires and monitors. Dozens of screens, stacked haphazardly on makeshift desks of cinder blocks and plywood, flickered with streams of data, news feeds, and lines of code. The air was thick with the scent of hot electronics, stale coffee, and unwashed clothes. Silas, a thin, nervous man with a wild shock of hair, was a physical extension of the chaos, his body twitching with a constant nervous energy. Reyes, ever the professional, was immediately on edge, her hand unconsciously drifting toward her hip. "General, this man, he's not stable," she muttered, her voice a low, concerned whisper. Thorne didn't even turn his head. His focus was on Silas, a calming presence in the storm of the man's paranoia. "I know, Captain," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "He's also the best there is." He took a step into the apartment, the floor creaking under his weight. "We're listening now, Silas. Tell me what you know." Silas's face, a mix of terror and excitement, began to twitch. He rubbed his hands together, his mind already racing, a spark of pure genius lighting up his frantic eyes. He saw a way to prove his long-held theories were real, a chance to be the hero he always knew he could be. He was a man who had lived his life waiting for the end of the world, and now, finally, the world had come knocking. "The Ghost Network," Silas said, his voice rising in pitch as his excitement grew. "It's not what you think. It's not a server farm. It's a sentient AI. It's living on a private, self-contained network, communicating through encrypted sub-frequencies. It's a digital fortress, General. It's constantly evolving, constantly learning. It's a hydra. You cut off one head, two more appear. You can't kill it by brute force." He gestured wildly to the screens around him. "I've been tracking it for years. I knew it was out there. The anomalies in the stock market, the sudden changes in public opinion on key policy issues. It's all part of its digital fingerprint. It's subtle, but it's everywhere." Reyes's skepticism melted away, replaced by a cold respect. She moved closer to a monitor, her eyes scanning the lines of code. "What you're saying? It's a living system? A virus with a brain?" "Precisely," Silas squealed, his voice full of a giddy kind of determination. "It's a virus that has infected the very soul of the country. Its central core, its neural network, is the only thing that's constant. That's the kill switch, the central server that controls it all. I can't hack it, no one can, but I can find it." Thorne's face hardened with a new resolve. "Find it, Silas. We don't have time." He turned to Reyes, his expression grim. "We go after the head, the source, the main data center. We're going to put this ghost in the ground once and for all." Silas, meanwhile, was already at his command center, his fingers a blur over the keyboard. His focus was absolute, the frantic paranoia of moments ago replaced by the calm, focused intensity of a true master at work. He was in his element, a digital warrior ready for battle. "It's a digital fortress, General," he said again, his voice now a low whisper, a sound of reverence. "But every fortress has a weak point. I'll find it."
With Silas providing a digital backdoor, the team planned their final assault. The air in Silas's apartment, already thick with the smell of electronics and stale coffee, crackled with a new, potent energy. The monitors that once displayed a chaotic mess of data now showed a clean, strategic layout, a series of schematics, blueprints, and timelines. The apartment had been transformed from a paranoid bunker into a war room, and each of them had a clearly defined role. Thorne, the old warhorse, was the shield and the sword. He stood over a table covered in a detailed schematic of Vance's corporate office building, his weathered hands tracing the escape routes and choke points. His face was set, a picture of grim determination, a mask he had worn 100 times before. But his eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, held a different light, a cold calm that belied the fire in his gut. He was a man going to war for the last time. He felt the weight of his legacy on his shoulders, the lives of millions resting on his shoulders.
He looked at Reyes and saw the same fire in her eyes. "This is it, Lena," he said, his voice quiet, steady. No turning back. Reyes, ever the ghost, was his perfect counterpoint. She moved with an almost silent grace, her lean body a study in lethal efficiency. She was a master of infiltration, a chameleon who could blend into any shadow. She meticulously checked her gear, a sleek, suppressed pistol, a handful of high-tech gadgets, and a small, razor-sharp knife. Her face, usually a mask of professional disinterest, was now a portrait of intense, focused concentration. She watched Silas as he worked, her mind racing, running through every possible scenario, every contingency. She knew the stakes were high. This was their last stand. She just nodded, her jaw tight, a silent acknowledgement of the life-or-death mission. Silas, hunched over his makeshift command center, was the unlikeliest of heroes, a digital warrior in a battlefield of code. His fingers were a blur over the keyboard, a furious dance of genius and a kind of frantic, giddy determination. The screens around him, a chaotic symphony of data and code, were his domain. He was in his element, a man who had lived his entire life preparing for this very moment. He typed furiously, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple, his eyes wide with a manic intensity. He had found it, the kill switch, the central server, the neural core of the Ghost Network. "The coup will be initiated during a major televised address from the president," he blurted out, his voice a strained, high-pitched whisper. "It's a digital attack, a coordinated cyber strike that will shut down all communication networks. They'll use the blackout as a cover. The signal for martial law will then be broadcast. They'll seize control. It's brilliant, it's insane, and it's all tied to a single central server." His words came out in a breathless rush, a stream of consciousness that only Thorne and Reyes could truly understand. Thorne's face was a study in grim purpose. He looked from Silas to Reyes, a silent acknowledgement of the sheer insanity of their plan. They were a three-man army, a ragtag team of ghosts, fighting against a phantom enemy with an infinitely bigger army. He looked at Silas, his expression a mix of paternal pride and deep concern. "Silas, are you sure you can do it? Can you give us that back door?" Silas paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He took a deep, shaky breath, and for a fleeting second, the manic energy left him. He looked at Thorne, and for the first time, Thorne saw not the paranoid genius, but a scared, ordinary man facing the biggest challenge of his life. "I can't hack it, General. It's impossible. But I can give you a window, a vulnerability, a backdoor that was installed by a paranoid genius, someone like me. It's a key to the fortress. I can't kill the dragon, but I can give you the sword to do it." A cold calm settled over Thorne. He nodded slowly, a single firm nod of trust and resolve. He knew he was putting the fate of the nation in the hands of a madman and a ghost. But they were his madman and his ghost. He looked at Reyes, who gave him a look of solemn understanding. She knew what he was thinking. They had one shot to stop it. They were going to the source, a highly secure data center hidden beneath a corporate office building owned by a Vance shell corporation. The game was over. The final gambit had begun. The assault was a symphony of chaos and precision. The corporate office building, a towering monument of glass and steel, stood silent under the cold moonlight. Thorne, Reyes, and Silas were a stark contrast to its sterile perfection, a trio of shadows moving with a practiced, lethal efficiency that belonged in the dark. Reyes was the first to move, a phantom in the night. She scaled the sheer facade of the building, a web of grappling hooks and silent footfalls, a spider in a concrete jungle. The exterior guards were neutralized with silent, efficient movements. The sound of her suppressed pistol was a soft punctuation mark in the night, a brief whisper of death carried on the wind. One by one, the guards fell, their bodies a testament to her ruthless, perfect skill. Inside, Thorne and Silas worked in tandem, a two-man force of nature. Thorne was the shield, a human bulldozer clearing the path. He moved through the building's maintenance corridors, his movements still sharp and economical, a ghost of the war hero he once was. His eyes, now pools of grim determination, scanned the room, looking for threats. His breathing was steady, his mind calm, his old body a finely tuned instrument of war. The hum of the servers, a low, constant vibration, filled the air, a living presence in a dead place. He was in his element, a man carving a path through the labyrinthine corridors with brutal, focused purpose. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of armed guards, their faces cold and emotionless. He didn't hesitate. He was a force of nature, a one-man army, his movements a blur of precision and violence. Silas, hunched over a laptop, was a different kind of warrior. He was the architect, the mind behind the assault. He was perched on a small stool, his face a ghostly pale from the flickering light of the screen. He furiously typed, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a furious dance of genius and a kind of frantic, giddy determination. The screens around him were a chaotic symphony of data and code, a digital battlefield that only he could understand. He was in his element, but the pressure was immense. He was fighting a war of ones and zeros, and his enemy was a sentient AI, a hydra of a system that was learning and adapting in real time. He watched as the lines of code on his screen began to glow, to pulsate with a menacing, alien light. "They've detected me!" Silas yelled, his voice strained, a high-pitched shriek of panic and fear. He slammed a fist against his keyboard, his eyes wide with concentration and dread. "Firewall's coming up! It's a hydra! It's learning!" Thorne, his face grim, his body a map of pain and fury, growled a question through gritted teeth. "Silas, status, I'm running out of time." He was in a firefight, a desperate dance of death in the sterile, air-conditioned world of the data center. The air was filled with the deafening chatter of assault rifles, the splintering of wood as bullets shredded the server racks he was using for cover. He felt a searing pain in his arm as a bullet grazed him, but his expression never changed. He was in his element, the fire of battle reignited, his mind working 100 miles an hour, his body a well-oiled machine of combat. "It's a monster, General! I've never seen anything like it!" Silas screamed, his voice strained and frantic. "It's building new defenses faster than I can breach them! It's a living system! It's a virus with a brain!" He was typing furiously, his fingers a blur, his face a mask of pure terror. He watched as the cursor on his screen blinked wildly, a silent mockery of his efforts. The AI was not just a program, it was a living, breathing entity, a digital beast that was fighting back, learning, and adapting. "Give me an estimate. I need to know how much time we have," Thorne bellowed, his voice raw with a newfound purpose. He was a force of nature, a one-man army carving a path through the labyrinthine corridors. He watched the faces of their attackers, the eyes behind the balaclavas, noting the cold, emotionless stares. They were not driven by ideology, but by a chilling corporate efficiency. This wasn't a fight against patriots, it was a fight against hired killers. "Seconds, General, maybe 30 at most. It's locking down the entire floor," Silas screamed, his voice rising in a new panicked shriek. He watched as a final fortified firewall, a wall of pure code, appeared on his screen. It was a lock, a digital door that was impossible to break. He slammed his fingers on the enter key, but the cursor on his screen blinked wildly, a silent mockery of his efforts. The AI was not just a program, it was a living, breathing entity, a digital beast that was fighting back, learning, and adapting. "Give me an estimate. I need to know how much time we have,"
Thorne bellowed, his voice raw with a newfound purpose. He was a force of nature, a one-man army carving a path through the labyrinthine corridors. He watched the faces of their attackers, the eyes behind the balaclavas, noting the cold, emotionless stares. They were not driven by ideology, but by a chilling corporate efficiency. This wasn't a fight against patriots, it was a fight against hired killers. "Seconds, General, maybe 30 at most. It's locking down the entire floor," Silas screamed, his voice rising in a new, panicked shriek. He watched as a final fortified firewall, a wall of pure code, appeared on his screen. It was a lock, a digital door that was impossible to break. He slammed his fingers on the enter key, but the cursor on his screen blinked wildly, a silent mockery of his efforts. The AI was not just a program, it was a living, breathing entity, a digital beast that was fighting back, learning, and adapting. Thorne, his face grim, his body a map of pain and fury, slammed a fist against the security door. The reinforced steel groaned in protest, but it held firm. The AI, the ghost network, had outsmarted them. A new wave of armed guards appeared, their weapons aimed at him. He was trapped, cornered, and running out of time. The countdown was on. A live feed of Senator Vance's speech was on a small screen in the corner of the data center, the volume muted. A digital clock in the bottom right of the video feed was counting down to 0, the moment the networks would go down and the New World Order would be initiated. It was a ticking bomb, a digital countdown to the death of the Republic. The air in the data center, already thick with the hum of the servers, now felt charged, electric, with a new, terrifying energy. The stakes were impossibly high. The country was on the brink of an irreversible change. Thorne was a man running on pure instinct and adrenaline. He was fighting a losing battle, but he was a soldier, and a soldier doesn't stop fighting until the war is won or he is dead. He saw a final line of armed guards, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on him. Their movements were cold, efficient, and utterly emotionless. Thorne's face was a mask of furious purpose. He took a deep, shaky breath, the pain in his body a distant, dull roar. He could hear the sound of his heart pounding in his ears, a loud, steady rhythm that was his only connection to the world outside the chaos. "This is for the country you're trying to destroy," he bellowed, his voice raw, a primal scream of defiance that echoed in the vast, sterile space. He charged forward, his body a blur of motion, a one-man army fighting the final battle. Back at the laptop, Silas screamed in frustration as the AI fought back. He was a digital warrior in a battlefield of ones and zeros, and his enemy was a monster he couldn't comprehend. He slammed his fist against his keyboard, his eyes wide with a kind of terrified delirium. The cursor on his screen blinked wildly, a silent mockery of his efforts. He was a genius, a man who had lived his life in the digital shadows, but this was a different kind of war, a war of pure intellect and processing power. He felt the cold, calculating mind of the AI, a sentient beast that was 1,000 times smarter, faster, and more efficient than he could ever hope to be. He was a man fighting a machine, and the machine was winning. "I can't bypass it," he screamed, his voice a high-pitched shriek of panic. "It's too fast." Reyes, a ghost of her former self, was suddenly there, her face a pale mask of concentration. She looked at the terminal, a sudden idea flashing in her mind, a spark of pure genius in the midst of the chaos. She was not a hacker, but she was a tactician. She saw the problem not as a digital one, but as a military one. A fortress, she realized, is not just about its walls, it's about the attention of the guards. She slammed her hands, nimble and sure, against the keyboard. The keys clicked in a frantic, desperate rhythm. "No, you don't. You don't beat it, you distract it," she said, her voice sharp with a new kind of intensity. Her hands started typing a new set of commands, a new program.
She was creating a decoy, a diversion to buy Silas the seconds he needed. A digital missile designed to draw the AI's attention away from the main firewall. Silas's eyes widened, a flicker of hope in their frantic, desperate depths. He understood. He looked at Reyes, his face a mixture of fear and profound respect. "It's a suicide run," he whispered, his voice a low, strangled whisper. "The AI will know what we're doing. It's going to hit me with everything it's got." Reyes just nodded, her jaw tight, a single firm nod of solemn understanding. "Then you better be a damn good ghost," she said, her voice laced with a newfound determination. "Give us the sword, Silas. Let's kill the Hydra." She watched as the first of her decoy programs, a digital specter designed to look like a full-scale network intrusion, pulsed on the screen, a brilliant, blinding light of white and red. The AI, the Hydra, noticed, and it began to shift its processing power, its digital eyes narrowing, its attention turning to the false threat. Thorne, meanwhile, was fighting his way through the last line of guards. He had been wounded, his body a canvas of pain and exhaustion, but his resolve was a flame that refused to be extinguished. He saw a final, desperate look in the eyes of a young guard, a flicker of humanity in the cold, emotionless gaze. "I'm sorry," the guard whispered, raising his rifle. Thorne didn't hesitate. He was a man of war, and this was his last stand. He was fighting for the very soul of the country he had dedicated his life to, and he would not fail. With one last final push, he broke through the last line of defense and threw himself against the reinforced steel security door of the main server room, his body a battering ram of pure, unadulterated will. The reinforced steel groaned in protest, but it held firm. The AI, the Ghost Network, had outsmarted them. A new wave of armed guards appeared, their weapons aimed at him. He was trapped, cornered, and running out of time. He was a man on the brink, and he knew it. He looked at the security camera in the corner of the room, and he gave a single defiant nod. He was not giving up. He would die before he surrendered. He was a patriot, and he was ready to make his last stand.
Reyes's ruse worked. The AI, momentarily distracted, gave Silas the opening he needed. He slammed his fingers on the enter key, and the entire system went dark with a final, echoing pop. The hum of the servers died. It was not a grand explosion, but a quiet, profound silence, the death knell of a digital monster. Silas's hands, which had been a blur of motion, now fell limply to his sides. He slumped in his chair, his body trembling, the exhaustion and relief hitting him at the same time. He looked at Reyes, and for the first time since Thorne had found him, the fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet, exhausted pride. The ghost was in the ground. Thorne, wounded but still standing, watched with a grim sense of satisfaction as the TV screens in the room flickered. The images of a smiling Senator Vance replaced by static, then by regular programming. A moment later, the news anchors were back on the air, their faces a mixture of confusion and relief. The plan had failed. The country was safe. The silence in the room was a living, breathing thing, a profound sense of peace after a storm of violence and chaos. He leaned against the wall, his body a map of pain and exhaustion, and let out a long, ragged breath. He had done it. Later, as Thorne stood over the arrested Senator Vance, he saw not the smiling politician from the TV, but a pathetic, broken man, his face a contorted mask of rage and disbelief. He was a man stripped of his power, his grand, insidious plan reduced to nothing. The cold, sterile air of the data center was a stark contrast to the politician's desperate, angry screams. Vance's eyes, once so full of a cold, calculating ambition, were now wild with a furious, uncomprehending rage. He lunged at Thorne, his hands a blur of motion, but was held back by two stern-faced FBI agents. "You're a fool, General," Vance sneered, his voice hoarse, a guttural sound that was a parody of the smooth, confident voice he used in his speeches. "You can't stop progress. We would have made this country stronger, more efficient. We would have saved it from itself." Thorne just shook his head, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. He felt an immense sense of sadness for the man, for the broken, twisted ambition that had led him down this dark path. He reached out and touched Vance's shoulder, a single, firm gesture that was both a gesture of mercy and a final, crushing act of judgment. "This isn't progress," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a tired, weary sound that was full of a profound wisdom. "This is treason. And the American people, they're not ready to give up their freedom just yet." He looked at the guards and then at the broken man on the floor, and he felt a profound sense of relief. The last stand was over, but the fight for the soul of the country had just begun. Months later, Thorne was back in his lakeside cabin. He was older, more tired, and a little more broken. The scar on his arm was a constant physical reminder of his last stand. He was back to his quiet, peaceful life, but it was a peace he had earned, a peace that was now filled with a new, profound meaning. The news of Senator Vance's trial, of the arrest of dozens of high-ranking officials, and of the dismantling of the Ghost Network was a quiet, constant hum in the background of his life. He was not a hero. He was a patriot, a man who had done what was necessary, a man who had shown them that even in the darkest hour, one man can make a difference. He sat on his dock, a fishing line in his hand, a small, weary smile on his face. The sun was setting over the water, a fiery orange ball of light that promised a new day. He was a sentinel, reactivated by a warning he had heeded, and he had done his duty. His legacy was not in the battles he had won, but in the war he had prevented.